Trump considers Canada to be so mean and nasty in his...
Times auto workers say the industry is like being on a roller coaster, but this tariff whiplash from the White House has people deeply concerned.
This may be the moment when the North American auto industry, as Americans have known it for more than half a century, quietly begins to unravel under the weight of a new trade war that few consumers yet fully understand. In recent days, the United States has moved to impose tariffs ranging from 25% to 35% on automobiles and auto parts imported from Canada and Mexico, a decision that is already sending shockwaves through boardrooms, factory floors, and financial markets across the continent. What once functioned as a deeply integrated North American production system is now facing its most serious test since the modern auto industry was built. Canada currently ranks among the top 11 automobile manufacturing nations in the world, producing more than 2 million vehicles per year, with the majority of those vehicles destined for American consumers. For decades, agreements such as the Auto Pact and later the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement allowed cars and components to cross the border 7 or 8 times before a single vehicle was completed. That system kept prices lower, factories running, and workers employed on both sides of the border. The question now confronting policymakers, manufacturers, and American households is stark. Will these new tariffs break the North American auto supply chain, cost tens of thousands of jobs, and push vehicle prices higher at a time when the global economy is already under strain? And before this story ends, there is one economic reality hidden beneath these tariffs that could shock even seasoned observers, and you will want to stay until the end to hear it. What is unfolding now is not a symbolic policy shift or negotiating tactic. It is a mechanical, mathematical squeeze that is already rewriting the economics of vehicle production across North America. And the numbers explain why the consequences could be far more severe than many initially assumed. Under the current framework, the United States is applying a tariff rate of 25% on fully assembled vehicles imported from Canada and Mexico, with certain categories of automobiles and critical components facing duties as high as 35%. These tariffs do not apply only once at the border. Because modern vehicles rely on tightly synchronized supply chains, parts and subassemblies that cross borders multiple times are repeatedly exposed to added cost, compounding the financial burden at each stage of production. The United States is not just a trading partner in this equation. It is the destination market. Roughly 7 out of every 10 vehicles and auto parts produced in Canada and Mexico are exported to American buyers. That concentration means even modest trade barriers would have significant effects. At current tariff levels, the impact is no longer modest. Consider a vehicle with a pre-tariff price of $25,000 United States dollars. A tariff of 25% alone adds more than $6,000 United States dollars to the cost of that vehicle before transportation, dealer margins, or financing costs are included. Industry analysts widely agree that manufacturers cannot absorb increases of this scale. The arithmetic leaves only one outcome: higher prices pass directly to consumers. The scale of trade at risk is enormous. Canada exports between 28 and 30 billion United States dollars worth of vehicles to the United States each year. Mexico ships an even larger volume, producing well over 3 million vehicles annually, most of them bound for American roads. Any sustained disruption at this level reverberates through employment, logistics, dealerships, and regional economies across the continent. From Washington's perspective, tariffs are being used as a strategic instrument in a broader trade war designed to encourage domestic production and reinforce manufacturing employment inside the United States. But the North American auto industry does not operate in national silos. It operates as a single integrated system. When costs rise sharply in one part of that system, the pressure spreads everywhere. And yet, the most damaging effect of these tariffs has not appeared in sales data or factory closures just yet. It is emerging quietly inside corporate planning rooms where long-term decisions are being made right now. What those decisions could mean for jobs, prices, and the future of the United States auto market is something we will reveal next, and the implications may be more unsettling than many are prepared for. The most destabilizing force inside the auto industry right now is not politics. It is operational reality. Modern vehicle production depends on a supply chain so tightly woven that a single car can cross national borders multiple times before final assembly is complete. Engines, transmissions, electronics, steel components, and software modules move back and forth across the United States, Canada, and Mexico in carefully timed sequences designed to minimize cost and maximize efficiency. Tariffs fracture that logic. Every additional border crossing now carries a new financial penalty, turning what was once an advantage into a liability. For manufacturers, this has triggered an urgent reassessment of where vehicles should be built, not in theory, but in practice. Major automakers have already begun responding. General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis are increasingly restructuring production to concentrate more assembly and component work inside the United States, where tariffs do not apply. This is not a temporary adjustment. It is a structural shift driven by cost modeling and long-term investment planning. Once a production line moves, it rarely comes back. One of the clearest signals came when Stellantis expanded manufacturing capacity in Illinois, a move that political leaders highlighted as supporting roughly 5,000 American jobs. From a corporate standpoint, the logic is straightforward. Producing vehicles closer to the final market reduces exposure to tariffs and stabilizes pricing forecasts. From a continental perspective, however, it represents a decisive break from the shared production model that defined North American manufacturing for decades. This shift marks a turning point in the trade war. Big Auto is no longer planning around Canada as a core manufacturing pillar. Instead, Canada is increasingly treated as a higher-risk jurisdiction inside a fragmented global economy, where tariffs now shape strategy more than geography or tradition. As production decisions shift, trade patterns are already beginning to distort in ways few predicted. For the first time in more than 3 decades, Canada is importing more vehicles from Mexico than from the United States. That reversal alone signals how deeply the old equilibrium has been disrupted. Political pressure is rising in response. Canadian leaders have openly discussed retaliatory tariffs and expanded Buy Canadian initiatives aimed at protecting domestic industry and employment. While such measures may offer short-term political reassurance, they also risk accelerating fragmentation across North America, pulling the integrated market further apart. Market analysts are increasingly concerned about demand destruction. Projections now suggest that prolonged tariffs could reduce vehicle sales across the United States and Canada by nearly 2 million units in the year 2025. Fewer sales translate directly into lower production volumes, reduced dealer activity, and job losses that extend far beyond factory floors. What makes this moment especially volatile is that none of these effects operate in isolation. Manufacturing decisions influence trade flows influence prices, prices influence consumer behavior, and consumer behavior ultimately determines which plants survive and which do not. Yet the most consequential outcome of this disruption has not reached public awareness. Behind closed doors, automakers are quietly modeling scenarios that assume permanent separation rather than cooperation across borders. If those assumptions become reality, the next phase of this story will not be about tariffs alone, but about which parts of the North American auto industry may disappear entirely. That possibility, and who stands to lose the most, is something we will uncover next, and the implications could be far more severe than the headlines suggest. The first casualties of this shift are not balance sheets or political talking points. They are people, households, and communities whose economic stability depends on auto manufacturing. When an assembly plant slows production, restructures, or closes, the damage spreads far beyond the factory gates. Direct job losses in vehicle assembly are only the beginning. Each auto plant supports a dense ecosystem of parts suppliers, logistics firms, maintenance contractors, tool makers, and local service businesses. When production is reduced or withdrawn, thousands of indirect jobs are placed at risk almost immediately. In regions such as Ontario and Quebec, where auto manufacturing has long provided stable, middle-income employment, the shock is especially severe. One example illustrates the scale of the problem. The loss of a major assembly facility in Brampton would remove approximately 3,000 direct manufacturing jobs. That figure does not include the additional disruptions to parts suppliers, transportation firms, and small businesses that depend on the spending power of those workers. Economists consistently note that auto manufacturing jobs tend to pay well above regional averages, offering benefits and long-term stability that few other industries can match. When those jobs disappear, the consequences are structural. Household spending declines, municipal tax bases shrink, local governments face pressure on social services at the very moment revenues begin to fall. For communities built around manufacturing, recovery is slow and uncertain. Retraining programs take time. Replacement industries rarely offer equivalent wages. The social cost extends across generations. What makes this moment especially dangerous is that these losses are not the result of a sudden recession, but of deliberate strategic decisions driven by tariffs and trade war dynamics. Once companies decide to reallocate production permanently, those jobs are unlikely to return, regardless of future political shifts. While manufacturing communities feel the impact first, American consumers are not insulated from the fallout. Tariffs on imported vehicles and components raise the cost structure of the entire market, not just foreign-branded cars. Higher input costs ripple through pricing strategies across the industry. Trade analysts warn that the cumulative effect of tariffs can add tens of thousands of United States dollars to the lifetime cost of vehicle ownership, once higher sticker prices, financing costs, insurance, and parts are considered. Even domestically assembled vehicles rely on globally sourced components, meaning price pressure spreads well beyond imports. Forecasts now indicate that prolonged tariffs could reduce vehicle sales across the United States and Canada by nearly 2 million units in a single year. Fewer sales mean reduced choice for consumers, tighter inventories, and less competitive pricing. For households already grappling with inflation and higher interest rates, the result is delayed purchases or forced compromises on safety, reliability, and efficiency. These price pressures also feed into broader inflation metrics. Rising vehicle and parts costs influence consumer price indexes, transportation expenses, and even labor mobility, as fewer people can afford to replace aging vehicles. What begins as a trade policy decision quickly becomes a cost of living issue. Yet this economic strain may only be the surface effect. Beneath it lies a deeper transformation in how mobility, employment, and industrial policy intersect in the global economy. The next phase of this story reveals why the consequences may extend far beyond cars and factories, touching the very structure of economic security in the United States and its closest trading partners. What is coming next could redefine who ultimately pays the price for this trade war. From Washington's vantage point, tariffs are presented as a corrective tool, one designed to reverse decades of industrial decline and restore manufacturing strength inside the United States. In the short term, there is evidence that this strategy can produce visible political wins. Some vehicle assembly and component production has shifted back to American soil, and certain regions have recorded increases in manufacturing employment tied directly to these relocations. For American workers in targeted states, this appears to validate the core promise of the trade war. Domestic production offers job creation, stronger local tax bases, and a sense of economic sovereignty that resonates deeply with voters concerned about globalization. These gains, however, come with substantial trade-offs that are becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Manufacturing vehicles in the United States is more expensive, labor costs are higher, regulatory compliance is more complex, and supply chains remain deeply reliant on components sourced from Canada and Mexico. Even when final assembly occurs domestically, critical parts still cross borders, carrying embedded tariff costs that cannot be easily eliminated. As a result, higher production expenses are passed through to consumers in the form of higher vehicle prices. This tension has not gone unnoticed by labor organizations and industry leaders. By the autumn of the year 2025, major automakers and the United Auto Workers had publicly raised concerns about the sustainability of prolonged tariffs. While supportive of domestic job creation, they warn that shrinking sales volumes and rising consumer prices could ultimately undermine employment gains, leaving workers exposed to future downturns. The core dilemma for Washington is clear. Tariffs may protect certain jobs today, but they risk weakening the broader auto market that sustains those jobs tomorrow. The longer the trade war persists, the more fragile that balance becomes. Beyond North America, the effects of United States tariff policy are being closely watched by key allies and competitors alike. In Europe, Japan, and South Korea, policymakers and automakers see clear warning signs. If tariffs can be applied aggressively within an integrated North American market, they could just as easily expand to other trading relationships. This uncertainty is already influencing investment decisions. Manufacturers are delaying plant expansions, reevaluating supply contracts, and increasing inventory buffers in anticipation of future disruptions. Such behavior reduces efficiency and raises costs across the global economy, even in regions not directly targeted by tariffs. China and Mexico have responded in kind, adding another layer of complexity. Mexico has moved to impose tariffs aimed at Chinese imports, effectively transforming a bilateral dispute into a multi-directional trade conflict. These retaliatory measures amplify volatility, disrupt global supply chains, and increase the risk of slower economic growth worldwide. Canada, caught between its largest trading partner and a shifting global landscape, is now actively seeking to diversify its export markets. Efforts to strengthen trade ties with Europe and the Asia-Pacific region underscore a broader recognition that reliance on a single market carries strategic risk in an era of escalating trade wars. What emerges from this pattern is a sobering reality. Tariff policies adopted by the United States do not stop at national borders. They ripple outward, reshaping alliances, altering investment flows, and placing new strains on the global economy. And yet, the most consequential outcome may still be unfolding as governments and corporations quietly prepare for a future where economic cooperation gives way to permanent fragmentation. That possibility and its long-term consequences is what we will confront next. As the trade war reshapes industrial priorities, Canada is confronting a reality that policymakers can no longer postpone. If large-scale automobile manufacturing continues to lose competitiveness under sustained tariffs, the country may need to pivot decisively towards sectors where it holds a clearer long-term advantage. Canada possesses deep structural strengths in areas that remain critical to the global economy. Mining, agriculture, energy, advanced materials, and technology already generate significant export revenue and attract international investment. The country holds vast reserves of critical minerals essential for batteries, renewable energy systems, and advanced manufacturing. Resources that are increasingly sought after as nations accelerate the transition toward electrification and decarbonization. Investment in electric vehicles and green infrastructure remains a strategic ambition, but the success of that strategy depends on access to large external markets. Without reliable entry into the United States, Canada must look outward, strengthening trade relationships with Europe and the Asia-Pacific region. This shift would represent a profound transformation of national industrial policy, moving away from dependence on a single integrated North American manufacturing model toward a more diversified global approach. Such a pivot carries risks. Resource-driven growth can expose economies to price volatility and geopolitical competition. Transitioning workers from manufacturing into new sectors requires time, retraining, and sustained public investment. Yet history suggests that countries willing to adapt early often emerge more resilient than those clinging to declining structures. The decision Canada faces is not whether change will occur, but whether it will be managed proactively or imposed abruptly by market forces. While the pressures are mounting, a narrow window for strategic recalibration still exists. The scheduled review of the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement in the year 2026 could provide an opportunity to redefine rules of origin, supply chain requirements, and tariff structures in a way that reflects the realities of the electric vehicle era. A coordinated approach among the three countries could allow North America to rebuild its industrial base around new technologies rather than legacy production models. By aligning standards, securing shared access to critical minerals, and redesigning supply chains for electrification, the region could reduce inefficiencies and restore competitiveness within the global economy. Such cooperation, however, would require political restraint and long-term vision at a time when trade policy is increasingly driven by short-term domestic pressures. Failure to seize this opportunity risks locking North America into a fragmented system where duplication, higher costs, and reduced innovation become permanent features rather than temporary disruptions. The stakes could not be higher. A successful restructuring could preserve jobs, stabilize prices, and position the continent as a leader in next-generation manufacturing. A failure would accelerate decline, deepen trade war divisions, and leave each country weaker in a rapidly changing global economy. What remains hidden from public debate is how close policymakers may already be to choosing one path over the other. Decisions being drafted now, largely out of sight, could determine whether North America reinvents itself or slowly fractures beyond repair. And the final chapter of this story may hinge on one critical choice that few voters have yet been told about. What this story ultimately reveals is not a temporary policy dispute, but a structural shift with long-lasting consequences. Tariffs, as a central instrument of the current trade war, are reshaping the North American auto industry from the ground up. Production strategies are changing. Supply chains are fragmenting. Investment decisions are being rewritten in ways that will define the region's industrial future for decades. For the United States, the strategy promises stronger domestic production and visible job gains in selected regions. For Canada and Mexico, it introduces deep uncertainty into industries that were built around integration with the American market. For consumers, the consequences are already emerging through higher prices, reduced choice, and growing pressure on household budgets. And for the global economy, the ripple effects extend far beyond automobiles, touching trade confidence, capital flows, and long-term growth expectations. This is no longer a theoretical debate. The arithmetic of tariffs is forcing companies to act now, not later. Plants are being relocated. Expansion plans are being delayed or canceled. Entire communities are being repositioned inside a new economic reality, shaped less by efficiency and more by political boundaries. The deeper risk lies in permanence. Once supply chains are dismantled and trust between trading partners erodes, rebuilding cooperation becomes far more difficult. What began as a tactic within a trade war now threatens to redefine how North America competes with Europe and Asia in an increasingly fragmented global economy. The defining question remains unanswered, and it demands careful reflection from policymakers and citizens alike. Is this a bold strategy or a risky mistake for the United States? The answer will not be measured only in factory openings or headlines, but in prices paid at dealerships, jobs sustained or lost, and the long-term strength of the global economy itself. One final detail, still largely absent from public discussion, may ultimately determine whether this strategy succeeds or backfires. That detail involves a decision quietly approaching on the policy calendar, and its impact could surprise nearly everyone watching this unfold. Subscribe for more fact-based global analysis.